Welcome everybody to the Assuminati podcast.
Welcome back.
Hey,
Right.
welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, indeed. We're just three guys giving our opinions about everyday topics, and we just assume that there's a conspiracy to be found. And today is no different. But first of all, thank you for listening to last week's episode on the Olympics and all the many fun games that we like to pay attention to and have fallen in love with. By now, we've had almost a full week and a half of nothing but Olympic coverage. It's been nothing but pleasant on this end. You guys enjoying the Olympics?
It's great here. Oh, yeah.
Very sporty. I'm staying up late every night.
Yeah.
Why not? It's good stuff.
I think it brings us together. It's a bonding element, not only nationally, but internationally, I think, as well, when you see these athletes interact with each other. That's cool. Maybe we should learn a thing or two from them and be nicer to each other, huh? What do you think, guys?
No, I agree with that.
Always
be kind.
Crusty Bobby.
Just state your mind.
Crusty Bobby. Okay. Well, once again, we thank you for listening and watching that episode. Speaking of which, we are, once again, just want to remind everybody, on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcast as well, if that's your flavor, if that's your poison. So feel free to listen or watch. If we're still on YouTube if you want to still see this and that and that.
Or if you don't want to see it, we've created options.
Maybe we have faces for radio as we
got smart. We knew our audience, so we thought we'd just go audio.
Absolutely. And we will be throwing up graphics throughout, just pictures of some of the things we'll talk about today. So YouTube's nice it's a nice companion piece, even for those of you just listening. So, speaking of the Olympics, we will talk about the Olympics once again this week. Instead of tackling the sports and the individual, some of them bizarre, some of them obscure, this time we're going to talk about what's happening behind the curtain. What's going on behind the scenes. I don't want to spoil too much. I'm going to turn the time over to Uncle Bobby, and he's going to give us a rundown and kind of introduce the theme of this Olympic-sized episode.
Yeah, so first of all, let's talk about the Olympics, how they came to be in the modern world. So there's this committee, the International Olympic Committee, or otherwise known as the IOC. They are an independent, international, nonprofit organization. Intriguing. They were founded June 23rd, 1894, as part of the revival of the Olympics. They met in Paris. They later moved the headquarters to Switzerland, where they still are today. But the vision of the International Olympic Committee is to build a better world through sport. Yeah.
Touching. That is touching.
Very touching.
Wow.
So what are they responsible for? So first off, they're responsible for coordinating the relations and actions of all members of the Olympic movement. They ensure the regular celebration of the summer and winter Olympic Games and protecting their uniqueness. They encourage the promotion of Olympic values, particularly through the practice of sport, placing the athletes at the heart of the Olympic movement, and also reviewing and approving bids to host the Olympics. And then on top of that, deciding what is an Olympic sport to be considered in the games. So that's their purpose. Financials, keep in mind, they're a nonprofit organization. They have over $5 billion in assets. They achieve their revenue through broadcasting and marketing rights, and they redistribute 90% of their revenue every year to put on the Olympic Games while supporting athletes and sports organizations of all levels around the world.
5 billion?
Seems like a lot of work.
Dollars.
Wow. It's a lot of cheddar.
And just a little bit.
IOC, I didn't know they were around since Matt's time. That's interesting. That's
before the phone.
That's a long time.
May have been before the telegraph. I'm not quite sure.
Pony Express.
Yeah. So a little tidbit.
Time.
Where were the first modern day Olympics held?
Is it Athens?
Yeah, it was in Athens.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Also, where were the last ancient Olympics held?
Was it Athens?
Yeah, it was Athens.
Hey, all
Look at that.
All right.
Brandon's right on it tonight.
All right.
On the money.
I'm a fan.
Mm-hmm.
Smart.
Wow. So how does a country even get the Olympics?
So to get the Olympics, these cities, they fill out an application. Everything starts with an application.
Yeah.
And
paper nowadays? Is that
paper application.
paper application? Oh, okay.
And it's gotten more intense over the years where a city can fill out this application and they need to sell the Olympic Committee on why their city is the right place to host the Olympics. So I'm sure there's a lot of PowerPoint, some charts, some graphs, some maps, maybe even some quotes from local celebrities on how they'll take care of the Olympics. So really it's presented in a package to the Olympic Committee. There's a deadline, and they choose where the Olympics are going to be held many years ahead of time, so that those cities can prepare, build all kinds of new buildings, roads. They basically rebuilt all of Salt Lake City when the Olympics were here. Whole new place.
Big. Yeah.
Yeah. So
And
if you would like to host the Olympics, go to Olympics.com and you can fill out an application.
Oh, Stansbury Park, here we come.
Mm-hmm.
From what I saw, it takes, in a lot of cases, in most cases, millions of dollars just to propose that your city or your country receive the Olympics. Just the process of selling them on your country takes millions of dollars, many years of preparation. Wow. Okay. And then there's voting, I believe, in this committee, this IOC committee. There are votes. There are people behind the decision, millions of dollars
Exclusive.
that end up affecting billions of dollars. Wow. Okay. Well, that sounds like a good, clean process, doesn't it?
So clean.
It sure does.
If
only.
Should be.
If only.
And that's what today's episode is really going to dive into, is the process and examples that we have found and many of you have seen, maybe in the news or on documentaries, of when things go wrong, when keeping it clean goes wrong with the Olympic Games. So what we're going to dive into first is an example prepared by our very own Matt. Matt, would you like to introduce the topic that you've prepared?
Absolutely. So as Robert mentioned, the Olympics, and Brandon has mentioned this, but the Olympics mean billions of dollars for whatever host country is granted that application, right? So is it worth all of the money that they put into it? Probably. With all of the infrastructure changes that come, all of the the money influx from visitors and travel and tourism, and all of that stuff make it worthwhile. So the first kind of example that I found of some shadiness in dealing with getting a bid for the Olympics had to do with the 2002 Winter Olympic bid scandal right here in Salt Lake City. There was a big deal
home.
when we were trying to get the Olympics back in 2002. So I think it actually predates that. So starting back in 1998, members of the IOC were accused of taking gifts from the Salt Lake Organizing Committee, so the SLOC, during the bidding process. It resulted in several IOC members being X'd from their group, from the IOC. Also, two of the Salt Lake Organizing Committee resigned their posts. So Tom Welch and Dave Johnson resigned as a result. And we all know that eventually Mitt Romney was called in to kind of head up the Salt Lake Organizing Committee to kind of put that back on,
if you will,
back on track and try and reconcile the books. I think that it was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. I think that was over budget. So Mitt Romney came in and kind of reorganized that and got it back on track. And that kind of is, in a nutshell, what happened. There was a lot more to it than that. People were accepting surgeries and gifts and tuition that were on the IOC committee from the organizing committee. And the organizing committee was keeping all of their financial data in-house and not disclosing any of that information. and that's kind of what flew up the flags, the red flags, and people started launching investigations. I think the Department of Justice ended up filing 15 charges of bribery and fraud,
Wow.
something like that. And eventually, the funny thing about this is eventually the people that were on trial for those were acquitted. So later on, they were all found not guilty, and
Wow.
everything was fine.
Well, when you can hire the best
Interestingly
lawyers in
enough.
the land. Wow.
Yeah.
That's when there's millions and millions of dollars at stake. And when you think of it, like you mentioned earlier, the infrastructure behind it all. So think of the contracts that are up for bid here, and some of the connections and corruption that can happen when
Yeah.
there's just infrastructure to be built, millions of dollars at stake. Like surgeries, did you say surgeries were part of that list?
Surgeries, yeah, and
Wow.
tuition payments, all of
Tuition.
that.
I'll put your kid through college if you vote for me, if you vote for these Olympics, or bring them to Salt Lake.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
How
all of that added
convenient.
up. So I think I mentioned it before, but it was in the millions. It was $375 million shortfall,
Golly.
which is what they were kind of in trouble with. And then Mitt Romney kind of came in with Bain Capital. You know, they reorganized the committee, picked a few new people, some of his friends. And that's a whole nother scandal later on that, you know, when he was running for president, some people pointed that out. But, you know, that's the biggest local scandal I can recall.
Big time. Big time. Made huge news.
Well, all I know is it can't be the biggest because my local Mexican restaurant just closed their doors to sell the Verges, and I'm not happy about it.
Someone's behind
Okay,
that.
it's the second biggest.
Yeah, the Olympics is second biggest to that.
Yeah.
Ain't got nowhere good to eat in Grantsville. So, Matt, that's pretty interesting about Salt Lake City. But I want to raise you a Tokyo.
Ooh,
I see your Salt Lake City and raise you a Tokyo.
Yes.
I call.
wow.
Yes. So let's talk about Tokyo. So there was several controversies surrounding the Tokyo Olympics, and I'll just highlight
what year
a few
was
of
that?
them. That was in 2020/21.
That's right.
So this was the Tokyo 2020 Summer Olympics that actually happened in 2021.
Just last year.
So yeah, just last year. So recent. So there was a lot of controversies surrounding the Tokyo Olympics. First of all, lies about the weather. So in the application to the Olympic Committee, I quote, "With many days of mild and sunny weather, this period provides an ideal climate for athletes to perform their best." Now, I don't know if any of you have been to Tokyo. I haven't, so I'm going to trust some other people that have been there that have described it as the heat in the summer is only being surpassed by Death Valley, California, the Horn of Africa, and our very own hell. So, seems someone could have fact-checked that pretty easily, but athletes did struggle with being able to endure that temperature because it's not something that everyday individual is used to. So lies about the weather was first. Next, as they were planning out for the Olympics and stuff, there was threats of plagiarism around the logo for the Tokyo Olympics. So, you know, never steal someone else's work. Within the Olympics, there was a disputed referee call in a beach volleyball match between the U.S. and Canada. Experts agree it was a bad call and it should have been overturned in the challenge, yet it was not. New technology contributed by Nike. There was shattering of records in track and field in the 2020 Olympics, and like far surpassing any record ever set. And it was set by the people wearing these new Nike shoes that had better technology, better spikes. So the questions around, was that a fair advantage of sport, taking this new technology into shoes? A Belarus sprinter after the Olympics, she refused to board a plane back to Belarus. Subsequently, she requested protection from Japanese police. Poland eventually gave temporary asylum on humanitarian grounds. Apparently, she was scared to return to Belarus after criticizing team officials' decisions.
That's right. Remember that.
We mentioned that this happened in 2021. It was the 2020 Olympics. I don't know how many of you remember about the pandemic, that little thing that we've been enduring for the last couple of years. But even after the Olympic Committee finally agreed to push out the Olympics, even though they said they never would, Japanese citizens did not want the games. They were worried there would be a super spreader event. In a poll, 78% of Japanese citizens said that the game should be canceled and not be held there. And Tokyo had seen record-breaking infections leading up to the games. There was quite a few things. It didn't turn out to be the super spreader event that they all predicted, but that was one thing. And then Tokyo was left with a $15 billion bill after the Olympics, double what was initially expected. So this little small bill. And then, as if that isn't enough, it all started prior to the Olympics. The French were investigating a doping scandal where the Russians had been bribing to keep their doped up athletes from being disqualified. Well, while investigating that, they found records of money flowing from the Tokyo Organizing Committee at the time of trying to secure games. Payments were sent both before the selection and after the selection to the Dayak family. The elder Dayak was an IOC member. The Dayaks dispute any wrongdoing. So, just a few facts about the Tokyo Olympics.
Yeah, I remember the weather. I follow cycling, track and field, and they were just irate. They were so angry at the lies. Now,
doesn't every place though brag about their weather?
Yeah,
I mean, every place I know of,
so nice.
You know,
the
thinks
IOC,
that their weather is the best.
The IOC couldn't have Googled that and fact checked them beforehand, right?
Yeah, like how's the weather
You'd think there
in
would
Tokyo?
be some research.
Should I visit in the month of July?
Right. And yeah, there was some issues with athletic performance. I remember the Nike thing. Even the speed walkers were breaking records with those Nike shoes. Look these up online, people. The long distance
Nothing wrong
shoes
with
that,
some technology
that
though.
Nike used. Yeah, it was interesting though. Yes, I watched speed walking during the Olympics.
It's really exciting.
I was blown away that it was a sport, and so I stuck around and watched it for a little bit, and it was interesting. And I watched.
There's some ladies
those guys sure sway a lot
at the mall that could compete in speed walking.
Well, then there's episodes of Malcolm in the Middle that teach you speed walking as well. For those. Anyway,
it's a great.
I've seen that. That's actually funny.
So good. Such Hal does it, man. He knows how to do it. Man, Tokyo Olympics. Yeah, you're right, Robert. It was there was issues left and right, and then you mentioned the bribes and the corruption that happened within these sports. Unreal.
Yeah, just a couple $1 million of bribes.
No big deal.
Alleged bribes.
Yeah, you mentioned the bill, the $15 billion bill, and they couldn't make any of that up with ticket sales. Like that was one of the big reasons that they went into so much debt.
They couldn't fill the stadiums. They had to keep people out due to COVID.
Yeah.
And Tokyo doesn't really get the money from the broadcasting rights. That goes to the IOC, which does distribute some money, but to be left with $15 billion for putting it on, that's quite a bit.
It's a rock and a hard place.
During a pandemic recession, I mean, that was just a tough Olympics to watch when it came to what happened to the Tokyo people. And you can kind of make the same case for Beijing. They don't have anybody in the stands either. I don't know too many people who are feeling bad for China on that, but yeah, they can't make up any of that revenue with ticket sales. It's just interesting. And yet some people are still getting paid under the table and behind the scenes. Oh boy. Okay, we're ready to keep it going.
Yeah,
keep the corruption train a moving. Woo woo. So I'm going to dial it back a little bit, back to what Matt was talking about, the Salt Lake Olympics. This, as I was reviewing the scandals that have happened throughout sports history, Olympic history, this one really stuck out. This one was the most damaging one that I could find, and it did happen during the Salt Lake Olympics. This scandal had nothing to do with the bribes that happened before the Olympics to get the Olympics to come to Salt Lake. This happened within the world of skating, pairs figure skating to be specific. It had been found, they use the word alleged here, but there's a lot of evidence that support it as an actual fact, that the pairs figure skating competition was fixed. Now, this is a big deal. This was super damaging to the sport, as well as any sport that is judged. I mean, I know and love many sports who have judges who give scores. And think about that. Each of those judges are technically votes towards this sport that could be bought behind the scenes, something to remember, something to pay attention to. Maybe that vote or that judge has been paid off by corrupt means in the background. Just something to think about, not to ruin every judge sport, but there is that possibility. They are human.
It's a nice way to pad the pockets.
Exactly. Hey, I could judge yours a little bit differently if you give me some surgery or some tuition for my kids, like Matt was mentioning earlier. So that's exactly what happened here in the 2002 Winter Olympics, Salt Lake, pairs figure skating. So let me see if I can get these names right. The Canadian pair of Jamie Sale and David Pelletier. So this was the Canadian duo. We're up against the Russian pair of Elena Bereznaya and Anton Sigahanev.
That was
Russia.
a very good pronunciation.
Thank you. I think that's the correct way. Google told me that's how you say it. No, I'm just joking.
I totally think I understood that.
Oh, there you go. Anton, I know that's his name. I saw a documentary with it. Just can't say the last name. My apologies. So that was the Russian pair. These two were the best two pairs in the world. Leading into it, nobody knew who would come out with gold. That's how close they were in the competition.
It was a tight race for sure.
Very tight race. And so it really would come down to who skated the cleanest. Everybody was familiar with the routines, the music, the outfits. Everybody knew ahead of time what those would be. So it came down to who was the cleanest in their routine. And so if you go back and watch footage of this or see documentaries on this, if you dive into interviews given from the experts, Canada skated the cleanest routine. If you look, the Russian man, the male, Anton, stepped out of a double, I think they call it, or let's see if I can get the exact term here. Double axel. He stepped out of it. He messed it up a little bit. The Canadians actually screwed up their pose, but that's technically not part of the routine and should not be considered. And so there's these arguments left and right. Canada skated the cleaner routine, and yet Russia was awarded the win. And so immediately there were calls of scandal. There were calls of corruption. And if you look at the countries who gave the gold medal to Russia, I'll name off some of the countries' judges who ruled in their favor. Russia, China, France, Poland, and Ukraine. So if you look at Ukraine, Russia, China, there's connections there. Of course, they're going to.
Were Ukraine and Russia friends back then? Because I've heard they're not getting along right now.
They sure aren't nowadays, and they've had their history, right? But as far as corruption, the Ukrainian judge had just been suspended 4 years prior to that for corruption, for accepting bribes. China.
I don't know if
Russia,
you remember either, Brandon. Do you remember when you were watching this as it happened? Just the shock on the skaters from Canada's face. I do. I still remember that.
I'll throw up some photos here for those watching on YouTube. But yeah, you should go YouTube. The reaction. You're exactly right, Matt. And then you look at the photos of the podium ceremony. You can see the Russian skater. In this case, it would be Elena, kind of looking over at the Canadians like we got you. Mm-hmm. Like this was, even though you skated the cleaner routine. And so the countries who ruled in favor of Canada, you've got USA, Canada, Germany, Japan. And so what they found out,
vote for your friend.
Yeah, you're gonna root for your friends. But Canada skated the cleaner routine in many's opinion, so that it immediately drew suspicion. And so they did an investigation because of the outcry. What they found from witnesses and self-admission later, the French judge was pressured by the head of French skating to vote for the Russian team regardless of the outcome. She admitted that when she was pressured in the lobby right after the skating event. Now, she, of course, later denied that once they got to her. And then they find out that there's mob and mafia ties all throughout the Russian International Committee. They had nothing to do with skating, but yet they were on the committee and on the board, and they had ties to the mafia. There's a mafia member here who was investigated and arrested for these bribes. I don't even know if I can begin to say his name. Almazan Tokhanovov was arrested by Italian authorities where he was hiding for charges of this bribery. The French delegation was suspended for only 3 years once they were found guilty of these bribes. So France was involved in this corruption. Anyway, this completely destroyed faith in the sport, faith in the judging system. Tara Lipinski, who just recently put together a documentary that can be found on Peacock. I know I keep promoting NBC and Peacock, but they kind of own the Olympics. She put together Medaling is the name of the documentary behind this. Everybody should go watch it. It's super interesting. She herself had just won a gold medal 4 years before that under the same judging system. She has said, and I quote, "This was the best thing to come out of this event, a new judging system." And so that this scandal prompted a new way to judge these judged skating events. So that was interesting. A lot of corruption, mafia ties, money, country against country, voting for certain pairs regardless of the outcome. These are all things that we suspect happened and did actually happen during the 2002 Winter Olympic Games. What do you guys think? Should we get in the skating rigging business? Should we fix some skating events?
There's probably some money in that, apparently.
There is. At least that's what these people think.
I'm sure it pays better than this podcast.
A little bit.
What are you talking about? We're worldwide.
World class.
And I was looking through the history of these types of corruptive stories have been happening since the beginning of the Olympics. Every Olympics has some kind of a story where somebody was paid off, an unfair judgment happened. Somebody walked away with the gold medal. So what happened is they realized what was happening. They discredited or threw out the scores from the French judge, which means there was a 4-4 tie. And they awarded gold medals to both Canada and Russia. They actually brought back both of the pairs out onto the ice a week later and did a gold medal ceremony for both of them. So yeah, again, YouTube it, Google it, watch the second medal ceremony. They were putting on a brave face. They both hated it. They both felt they deserved it. So yeah, it was really interesting after all of that corruption. And how many more stories are there like that haven't been documented, that haven't come to light?
There's at least 5.
Again, these are judges who have votes. They can be bought. And how many have them? How many have been? How many will be?
I can be bought. You know,
Robert,
who wants me to vote for you?
What would it take for you to vote for a Russian skating pair to win?
Well, I like the Russians, first off.
Well,
I'm usually cheering for them.
They aren't even allowed to skate under their own flag nowadays, based on some of the corruption that they've been caught with. They're the Russian Olympic Committee. They can't even fly their own flag.
True.
So
the ROC,
when it comes to the doping and allegations and findings, they can't even fly their own flag. So there's a whole nother podcast, a whole nother story. So we hit on some heavy topics today, Bob.
All right. So that's it for today's episode of the Assuminati podcast. Today we talked about the International Olympic Committee. Are they a corrupt organization or not? We'll let you decide. So thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Join us again next week for a review of today's Super Bowl ads.
Woo!
Make sure you subscribe to the
Super Bowl.
podcast on iTunes or Spotify or Hot Off the Press, Google Podcasts. Share with your friends and family, like us on Facebook, and comment what you thought of today's episode. Until next week, have a great one.
Ta-ta.
USA, USA, USA.
Yeah, so speaking of Apple podcasts, thank you to Coconut Boy 88 for the positive 5-star review.
Yeah, I'm
we're
glad
awesome
you like
too.
us.
Woo woo! He gave
I
us a
like your
comment.
username.
Did he comment?
Gave us a comment. The comment
or
is
she.
these guys are awesome. He or she, him, it,
Coconut boy.
whatever pronoun.
I don't know who you
go
are,
for.
but apparently
We're
we're awesome.
pronoun friendly.
You know, we
but,
didn't even have to pay for that review.
Hey,
That was a freebie.
and that's
Yeah.
not one of my burner accounts. That's great.
Nope. The comment is these guys are awesome. And I think there's some emojis on there too.
Ooh,
Ooh.
Thank you
Well,
to
thank you.
Coconut Boy 88.
all right.
We appreciate you listening. Share with your friends.
Appreciate it. All of
Yeah.
it.
Let me tell you about the birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees.
I'm campaigning to be on the IOC. Someone put me on there, and then I will do it for 5% cheaper than the Dyack family.
Wow, that's a pretty good discount. Okay, so
Yeah,
it's
my
all
vote.
man.
I think it's losing is good for kids, especially. Just to ask my kids if they
Especially your
win
kids.
me in foosball, for example.
There we go.
I'm still undefeated.
Yeah,
My family.
slam it. In
Well,
Other
there.
boys can beat me.